Let me introduce you our next speaker here. Um, Pete Scazzero planted New Life Fellowship Church here, our church right here, where we're meeting in 1987. And one of the reasons why for nearly 30 years we have had this commitment to racial reconciliation and racial justice is because of the original vision that God gave Pete when he planted New Life. In addition to the planting of New Life Fellowship, Pete has worked tirelessly over the years to create really a paradigm of spiritual formation that can undergird the kind of work that we do for Jesus. And we've called it at New Life Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. We're going to have another break at the end of Pete's talk in our little small group time. And so the EHS books, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Emotionally Healthy Leadership, should be available here on the side there. And our conference is coming up in 2 months. We limit it to 350 people. We probably have space for like one person at this point there. But we will be, at some point, live streaming some of the conference there. The reason we're in this room is because today, especially in this room, is because how the grace of God has worked through Pete throughout the years. And Pete has been one of, not just the guy that took his job, took the job from him, the 3 years ago, but beyond that, he's been perhaps the most significant mentor in my life in terms of my marriage, my discipleship, and my leadership. And so we gave Gabriel a really rousing, crazy applause. We gave Kathy an applause, I'm going to ask you to do a little better here for the guy who planted this church here. And so give it up for Pete Scazzero as he comes up.
It's a lot. I mean, Rich got mentored by Gabriel in seminary, so I wish I got mentored by Gabriel in seminary, actually. So thank you, Rich, very much. Now, you have a sheet in your packet. I actually kind of made an outline of what I'm going to say to keep me on track of what I consider our contribution to the emotional healthy spirituality and the bridging barriers of race, culture, class, and gender. So it'll help you follow along, hopefully, and more importantly, helps me follow along and not get crazy and be all over. So I think Gabriel and Kathy have done a phenomenal job, I think, of laying out some of the challenges before us. And again, as I said here, what's interesting about traveling globally is you realize how, while we have our particular American wound of slavery and actually the Native American, but in particular slavery, other countries have their battles. So everything we're doing here, I realize, has application globally in every country on the face of the earth, which is so interesting. It's the same dynamics and I think theological and practical issues to confront. So again, the challenge before us is the powers and principalities that seek to divide us, and very large. And I love that statement under number 2 that the church biblically is a multiracial, multicultural community that transcends race, culture, economic, and gender barriers. Okay, so I think that's why you're here. But that biblically, the whole nature of what is the church is we are a community that we encapsulate hopefully the best of every culture and race, but we transcend it. And so we're first Christians and secondly whatever our ethnicity may be or color. But that's what makes the church the church. That's the whole point of the book of Acts. And so let me tell you a bit of my story and how I got into this as a white Italian. I probably can tell I'm white and Italian American. I was raised in a very tight subculture. My parents my family comes from Italy, both sides, from a place called Naples, and moved into that immigration trend in the 20s was to Brooklyn and East New York. And so I was raised in a very Italian American family that was very tight and closed. All of our friends were Italians, Americans. We would sit there and listen to lectures about how all the other ethnicities have oppressed us, especially the Irish. I married Irish, which is very interesting, And actually, when I went to college was the first time I actually interacted with Protestants. I mean, we just didn't hang around Protestants. And then I became a Christian at 19 and got involved almost immediately within the varsity Christian fellowship. And so I was very fortunate in that when I came to Christ and had this tremendous conversion, I was exposed to a multiracial staff team that informed me immediately that part of being a Christian was bridging racial, cultural, economic, and gender barriers. Like, that's the gospel. Like, we deal with racism. And so all of a sudden I was I realized the way a baby's born on earth physically really affects them the rest of their lives. Well, the way a person's born again also affects them the rest of their spiritual lives. So for me, I was very fortunate. Like, I never saw like any separation of the gospel and reconciliation, because I was birthed into it, and I thank God for it's one of InterVarsity's, I think, great strengths and legacies. And so I was immediately in these conversations, all these intense conversations, which had nothing to do with my family growing up. I won't even go there. And then I went on staff in InterVarsity within 3 years, and I was a kind of a traveling evangelist. And the first campus they sent me to was Livingston College, which is part of Rutgers University. And I was doing evangelism, open air evangelism. I was like crazy, you know. I'd stand up in a cafeteria and start preaching. What did I know? I was just a new Christian and doing it. And they sent me to Livingston College, which was 80% Latino and African American. And so I stand up in the cafeteria and I start preaching about Jesus, you know. And you understand, everyone's like at these balconies, and you know, I'm the white guy in the middle. And I'm just preaching away, you know. And they're yelling at me and cursing me. "You white guy, go home!" You know, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, everyone's so angry here, you know. But it was just a tremendous education, you know, for me. It was all wrapped up in the gospel for me, and so I was very blessed. And so I was part of a all African American church that met on campus, a Latino church on campus. But it was always given to me that multiracial, multi-ethnic churches was like the heart of God. And so I went on staff in InterVarsity for a few years, and eventually went to seminary. But there was never a question to me that I was going to be involved in some kind of multiracial, multicultural church. Like, that was it. So graduated, and we felt a call from God to come back to New York City here, and we spent a year in Latin America learning Spanish, and then planted New Life Fellowship in September 1987. It was very much what we call a scratch church plant, you know, walking the streets doing evangelism. But you know, I was, you know, as the church started, I think we're one of the few white people. It was very hard to get people to join our church initially, because obviously we were like up the street here about 3/4 of a mile, and you know, it wasn't very glamorous. There weren't people or any money or a building to meet in, but it was from day one. It was the vision of the church that we would, you know, preach Christ, and we would be a church that modeled the power of the gospel. To me, I went to lots of seminars like you are here, and I think part of what I loved about Kathy's statement about you've got to find what is God's call for you in the place, because I remember wrestling with that quite a bit. Like, well, what's God? What have you given me to do as a white Italian American, you know, and to bring to bear on this. And I ended up saying to myself, I'm a big reader, that I would bring my leadership to bear, that we'd actually do it. I didn't have an agenda to be a lead pastor. I would hanker down, unlike Gabriel dealing with, you know, national issues. We would just do it. And I'd give my life to planting myself here in one area for my life, and plant New Life Fellowship. So that's what we did. We moved here and into this area of Queens, and we chose it very purposefully because of its enormous diversity. At that point, we're fluent in Spanish, and so we started in English, then eventually moved to Spanish. And so we were dealing with racial tensions from day one. I mean, there's all kinds of racial tensions. I mean, it's constant. But the church was growing. But year 4 or 5, we had a split in our Spanish service in the afternoon. And so we were averaging about 400 plus people in English in the mornings and about 250 people in Spanish in the afternoons. There was lots of tensions, but the Spanish service had a split, and about 200 people left to go down the street. What I didn't understand was that the Spanish split had a lot to do with race. And because it was Colombian, Dominican dynamics, color of skin dynamics, and I was really quite ignorant of what was happening. I wasn't nuanced at that point. And 200 people left, and it was such a mess. And I remember someone then handing me a book called The Americas, written by Peter Wynn. And it's all about the history of Latin America from the perspective of race. And it takes every country one by one, from Haiti, Dominican Republic, you name it, all the way down, and the coast of Costa Rica and Colombia. And all of a sudden, a lot of things began to make sense to me of what was going on in our Latino congregation. Here I am, the white guy preaching, do you understand? So I'm just happy we're all together. But I also had African American, Latino, I had a lot of tensions there as well. I mean, tremendous tensions in our church. We had a lot of foster care kids, and so I had a number of African Americans upset because we were drawing in folks from the community that they were trying to get their kids away from. We had that going on as well. And then, of course, I had white people leaving on a steady basis. When they would come, they wouldn't stay long term. And then, of course, the whole Asian dynamic. As we drew, Filipinos and Indonesians and Chinese and Koreans, and all those tensions with African Americans, and trying to help them understand the fact that you're in America now, this is now your wound as well, and you need to own it with the rest of us. And they're just, look, I got to America, and I'm going up the ladder, and I'm not looking for this problem. And I said, well, you're at New Life Fellowship, you have to face the problem of racism, and it's part of your discipleship. So that was another big tension we were dealing with. So it was, I'd say that the splits and the pain were very educational. I was reading a lot, but I was living a lot, but I was listening to a lot of stories. I mean, I think I was hearing a lot of stories. I was growing in that, but I was, no question, I was at a wall, in terms of, I knew that we were potentially just going to be another one of these dream church plants that wouldn't make it long term. Because we weren't, there was some depth discipleship that was needed that we weren't hitting. And when you get involved in living this out as a community, you're going to hit stress and conflict. And you've got to have the ability to have very difficult conversations. And I just saw how people get triggered, and the wrong people sometimes were having the conversation, and I couldn't tell it was their family of origin, or was it the fact that I'm white that you're mad at me, or are you mad at me because of your mama? I just couldn't figure it out. And they sure couldn't figure it out. And that was the problem. Their unawareness was causing a lot of confusion in the big group as a whole, especially when you got to leadership levels. And I've been around enough to know, I'd seen so many splits of church plants and churches that were seeking to be multiracial and multicultural. I mean, I'd seen so many across the country, because I've been following it for many years at that point, and I saw so many that just didn't make it. And I remember saying to myself, I don't know. Like, oh God, but we were at a wall. But then it was in 1994 when that Spanish split happened that was a key moment, because it wasn't just now the racial issue, it was now personal. Because I was at my own wall, and many of you know my story from the books, I was tired, I was exhausted, I was worn out, I was stressed, and my wife was miserable, my marriage was not going well on top of that, and I was depressed, I was sad, I was grieving, all the losses and all the pain, and I didn't have a theology for that. So out of that came in 1990, really the key moments, if I could just follow you, there were some key moments and decisions at New Life, I think. Before I get to the contribution of VHS, I just want to mention to you, I think, obviously, at that point, I got the iceberg. The iceberg is the image that we use a lot at New Life Fellowship, which is 1/10 of the iceberg is what you can see visibly in a person's life, but 9/10 is below the surface. And that is what discipleship is about. It's about deep transformation. But this stuff only comes out under stress. And it's sure going to, you know it's coming out if you're doing racial reconciliation. You're crossing classes and genders. If you're really in it, you better believe all this stuff is coming up. Now, maybe you're at all one ethnic church and you're not dealing with this. You'll get by for a while. But there is no way you can get by. I can't imagine doing this kind of a church without emotional spirituality. I just can't even imagine without saying, we are going to do deep discipleship. We're going to do real transformation in Christ and not just attendance, numbers, programs. I can't even imagine. So, this thesis in 1996 came clear to us that emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable, that it's not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Now, you got to understand, this whole emotional spirituality was birthed out of the struggle of reconciliation. I mean, it's not, I don't really speak it from that angle, but that's really what was that was the primary struggle, besides my own personal life not doing well. But once that became clear, that if you're judgmental, unloving, proud, defensive, it doesn't matter how anointed you are, how gifted you are, the color of your skin, how many people you can lead, you are immature. That was gigantic. And to start confronting that head on, that the mark of maturity is approachability, humility, brokenness, softness, that was an entirely new day. It leveled the ground. And so it got us on a journey theologically. We're talking about everything's theology, about what is discipleship. We have to address the whole person. And we dove into what does this whole emotional piece look about. And then we got into this whole contemplative, Rich mentioned monastic spirituality, a deep, slowed down spirituality, silence, solitude, Sabbath keeping, drawing from the riches of monasticism. And that too had a big impact on our whole reconciliation here at New Life. And so the key moments, I think, were number one is we had a very clear, non-negotiable mission from day one. I mean, it was like, we are about bridging racial, cultural, economic, and gender barriers. That was never up for grabs. That was never a question. That's who we are. That's what we do. Number two is we were willing to suffer and go slow. And I find that very commonly, I'm talking to young leaders who want to do multiracial churches and all that, but they're so eager to have numbers quickly. And they want to, they're comparing themselves to these white suburban churches or, what's in Christianity Today or whatever. And I'm like, if that's your goal, then just forget this. Because this is a different goal. Not that I want to grow. I want to see people come to Christ, but there has to be a willingness to suffer, which means that we may not make a key hire because we recognize that this commitment to diversity means that we want to make sure we're represented as a leadership. And we'll wait on God for that because that commitment is so great. You have to be willing to have nobody in your church left, basically. I mean, the question is, how much of a value is it? I think it'd be really cute. I know, it's really cute. I think it'd be so rich. It is very rich. I think it would really edify everybody. Absolutely. But the question is, will you die for it? That's really the question. I think we had a commitment as a leadership. Now, I'm talking about not just myself, the board, that we would die on this hill. And really, if the church went down to nothing, we were going to have, this was a value. And I know many of you at New Life have the same value. That's why you're here. And I think there was thoughtful, prayerful, difficult choices that we made all along the way. We looked foolish, we looked disorganized, we were criticized for many, many reasons. And I will not go down that road because you cannot explain it to people. And one simple example, we had a chance to buy a building about maybe 6 or 7 miles from here in Queens. It would have been multiracial, but it would not have been near a subway train, which would have meant we would have lopped off basically our poor at New Life. But we could have still been multiracial, do you understand? But it would have been middle class multiracial, multi-ethnic. But the value was, no, we are bridging class. I know, but are you willing to be homeless for that value? Do you understand? That's the question. Because it's more expensive to be here in this crowded building where there's not parking than it would be to be in Fresh Meadows where there's parking for 1,500 people. And the building was $1.5 million cheaper. And we could have grown to double, triple the size. I mean, all these factors. And you feel the seduction, but it was unanimous. The board saying, no, we're not doing it. If we're homeless, we're homeless. But we're going to trust God for this building in his time, and we waited. But those are difficult choices. And EHS, I think what happened, key decision was, once we got into emotional spirituality, a decision was made about who sits at the table. What I mean by that is, if you were not doing your interior work, you were no longer at the table. Now, that was a pretty big decision. Now, what are you talking? He said, what are you talking about? And again, we're dealing with powers and principalities. Let's not underestimate that. And so, therefore, that if you're going to be engaged as a Asian American or Latino or African American or white person, you're in this level of discussions on a large basis now for several hundred people, 1,000+ people. You better have your stuff together, all right? You better have done some inner work, or you're adding gasoline to the fire. And I've been around a lot. We've been around a lot of that. So as the white guy in the room, made a call, and it was a good call, in my opinion, because it kept us alive. Actually, because it changed the whole discussion. And so this comes out of the Emotionally Healthy Leader book. But I like this image, and I'll share it with you because I think this is and identified really 4. This is a skyscraper, and these are pilings that go deep in the ground, when they build a skyscraper up, they got to go deep with these steel beams deep in the ground. And some of these steel beams in Manhattan go down 25 stories, all right? This is solid rock in Manhattan. But they must put these beams in properly, or when you build up, the building will lean or crack, all right? So World Trade Center, I believe it went down 25 stories. And they have situations where they did not put in the steel beams or pilings properly, and over time, what happened, the building began to lean over. Windows, they couldn't open them, cracks formed in the wall, and they had to make two choices, either lift the whole building up and lay the foundation properly, or they had to tear the building down and do it all over again. And basically, what we discovered was that there are certain inner life issues that have to be laid in leadership's life properly if you're going to build well. There's no getting around it. And this is going into rock. And so here it is. Here's the 4 inner life issues that I still hold to our core. One is face your shadow, that you're looking at your shadow. We just did a genogram in our little workshop, that you're looking at your family of origin and your culture going back 3 to 4 generations. You're aware of how that stuff is impacting who you are today, how you deal with everything from affection to sex to anger to racism to marriage to singleness to what is success. I mean, it's bottomless, but you're dealing with your shadow and you're aware of it. Secondly, you lead out of your marriage or singleness. There's a healthiness out of the way that you're a married person or the way that you're a single person. Now, that vocation we call that new life, the whole theology on that, but you have integrity. I remember talking to one guy, said, your marriage is a wreck and you're trying to reconcile the world. You know, you're trying to bring down demonic powers around race and your spouse is miserable. Okay, George said something's not congruent here. And this is not going to work. This is not going to last. I don't care how eloquent you may be. Thirdly, that you've got a life with God, a slow down for loving union. That is, you're anchored. You've got silence. You've got solitude. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then you practice Sabbath delight. You've got a life your life is God. Your life is Jesus. We're headed for an eternal Sabbath rest. And that inner life then informs all the outer life stuff that we do. And I could have added outer life stuff like, reconciliation. It's going to inform all of that in the way that we come to issues. So, in fact, let me just go back for a second here, and let me make a couple comments about each one. So for example, we would have folks in discussions in the past, and I'm thinking of one person in particular. I'm going to give a number of stories, but she had a lot of trauma in her own family growing up, and she had a lot of anger. And I remember her. She would often come after me as a white guy, which it's fine. I mean, it's a lot to come after me as a white guy. I understand. I appreciate that. But there was so much unresolved stuff from her own family and abandonment from her own father and her own history that she wouldn't look at. But now that all got mixed in with the racial conversation, so every time that she was involved in a high-level panel discussion, things got worse. But it wasn't about simply the power and principality of racism. It was about her. And finally getting to a place that you've got to address this in your life. And I remember, I think some others, you want to be at the table, you got to do some deep work on your shadow. Because we've got to be able to distinguish what's your shadow, you don't trust people, and what's your shadow of, you don't want to trust me because I'm white, or trust this, Latino, or trust this Asian American. You got to be able to sort that out. But without this work, it's very difficult to sort out what's culture, what's history, what's your family, what's you. And that was very, very powerful. And the second thing, marriage or singleness, I mentioned that, and that's an obvious one. But this thing of slow down for loving union, what I'm talking about is that you've got a deep spirituality. And I think it's been mentioned by, Kathy and Gabriel. And that is that we're not about reconciliation. We are about Jesus. Reconciliation flows out of being about Jesus. You can't be about Jesus and not be about reconciliation, right? But we are Jesus. Our whole life is about Jesus. We eat, drink, and sleep Jesus. We're looking forward to seeing him face to face. Now, Jesus is passionate for the reconciliation of the world in every full sense of the word. And we are fully life committed to bridge racial, cultural, economic, and gender barriers. I'll die on that hill. But I do it out of a passion for Jesus who loves me. It's very important to distinguish. Otherwise, reconciliation becomes idolatry. And it's a very thin line, and they're so closely connected. But it's very important that we're developing our walk with Jesus. You remember in Acts 19, when the 7 sons of Sceva were trying to cast out demons, and finally the Spirit leaps up and says, "Jesus we know, and Paul we know, but who are you?" And they're trying to do this warfare without a life in God, without a life, we call it, of loving union with Jesus. And so we know that the core foundation is that for all of us, walking with Jesus is number one. That we're cultivating a deep personal relationship with Jesus. And for us, that includes things like offices and silence and solitude, and we're like the desert fathers. We like to call it, we're drawing from the riches of monasticism. We are not doing American evangelicalism, which does not make disciples. That we're doing true discipleship. We're not doing programming and numbers and attendance and feel good. We are doing discipleship. Why? Because we will never bridge a barrier without it. That's an illusion. You're asking people to change their whole lives. And that's going to take Jesus doing something deep, deep in people. So that number 3 is critical, that everyone is slowing down their lives for loving union. Again, if there's no time to slow down, then just don't do it. Because you're going to make things worse. It's not going to last long term. We're talking about being a prophetic, countercultural community. Do you understand? That really bridges race, culture, gender, class. You realize how radical that is? You realize how revolutionary that is to actually happen? I'm not talking about just coming to church on a Sunday. There are churches that are, quote, multiracial, lots of ethnicities, but they're not a family. They're not a community. They're not living life together. That's a very different ballgame. We're not in each other's homes. People aren't intermarrying. We're not making life decisions to not climb up the ladder because I want to be part of this community. That's a very different thing. And I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm listening to stories. That's going to come out of a deep walk with Jesus. And of course, for Sabbath for me, it's just my life, again, is Christ. I'm going to see him face to face. And so I understand everything in life is short term. I recognize it's all going to pass away. One day we will all see him. So let me just mention one thing about where the key moments was we made a decision in 96 as we got into emotional spirituality that we would really engage in all difficult conversations. We would not be afraid of any of them. Whether it's from the pulpit, doing panels, but just, getting in there. And so we would talk about race among African Americans, and skin color and how that all works out. Talk about race in Latin America, getting Colombians to talk to Colombians about it, and Central Americans with South Americans, and Puerto Ricans with Ecuadorians, and just let's go there, and let's talk about, Korea. Let's talk about Korean and the Chinese. Let's have the open conversation about, how the Koreans feel about the Japanese, and we got some Japanese people here, and the Arabs with the Jews. I'd have Jews come to me and say, one Arab Palestinian said, she'd come to me and say, God forbid my child ever marry a Jew at this church, and you got that tension. You got, and you got the Arabs upset. Why are you honoring why are you mentioning the Jewish holidays? From the pulpit. And so you had, all these tensions, but you're having these conversations. And you're not afraid anymore because you're equipping people to actually have them and engage. And like Claude, a friend of mine, Claude, he's talking about why it's so difficult for African American churches to get white people. Many African American churches are trying to do reconciliation. It's very difficult. And Claude, he's a bishop and a friend of ours, and he says, well, it's very hard for those with power to give it up. For those with the power to actually come under and be a minority and have less power. And they may hire white staff and are doing a number of things, but and then we talked about North Carolina and just the whole nature of North Carolina being very segregated as a city of Charlotte, and old money versus new money, and all the old money built on the back of slavery, and the fact that you can't break into that, and just having those kind of discussions. It just takes a level of maturity to be able to sit there and listen and not be triggered and have a sense of self that, okay, I'm here, I'm okay. But the church has got to be able to engage in those conversations. Now, so let me, if I was going to, we have to, in some ways, racial reconciliation and EHS are inseparable, In other words, it's not possibly a person who bridges barriers well while remaining emotionally immature. I was just saying, I think it's kind of our thrust would be at New Life over these 30 years. That this EHS thing is indispensable. I think it's our contribution to the next generation going forward. So I'm going to just break it down here to the contribution of EHS, and I added one to my list here. So So I'll go through them relatively quickly. First is genogram and intense passion for Jesus. The radical edge of a slowed down spirituality. And it's a radical edge. And really, again, it's about passion for Jesus, but it's about letting go and dying. In other words, that I'm in such a deep place with Jesus that, do you understand? Like, think of the cross, the crucifixion. You know, I'm not holding on to anything. So I get to a place where I'm just, for all of us, we've just let it all go. Like hanging naked from a cross, like my life is Jesus. And it's out of that deep place, I think it enables us to go places otherwise we would never go. And hear promptings of the Holy Spirit that we would never hear, and make decisions for our lives that we would never make. Most American Christians are making decisions based on where is it comfortable to live, where are the best schools for my kids, where can I buy a home cheaply, and I'll serve Christ there. I mean, that's basically American Christianity. We're talking about inviting people to make decisions based on a value that goes against their family, goes against the culture, for the rest, not just for an internship, not just for 2 years, for their lives. I mean, do you realize what you're asking people to do? And for that to happen in American culture today, because the racial divide is not getting less. It's growing. It's growing. Even though the young generation the folks in their teens and 20s really want to do it. They want to bridge racial, cultural, economic barriers. They just have no idea what it's going to cost them. They have no idea. And I see many get into it, and in their mid-20s, they meet somebody, and that's it. I've had enough. But to stay long-term, I think that's our prayer and hope for the next generation. That's number one. The second is genograms. And that is our families going back 3 to 4 generations. This thing of genograms is what I think is one of the practical tools to how do we help people go back and look at their family of origin going back 3 to 4 generations. We've done a lot of work on this. But everyone's got to ask that question for your own personal life and your family. And that's painful work. If you don't believe in grace and the love of Jesus, you can't do this because it's very scary. But what it does, it levels the playing field. It doesn't matter who's got a PhD. It doesn't matter what your skin color is, what country you're from. When we do genograms, all of us are broken. And it has been one of the most powerful ways at New Life Fellowship. We're all in the same playing field. It does something that is just, I don't know what to say. It's just so breaking of everyone in the room that it's just very uniting. And then it also helps us look at our own culture in an objective way. One of the riches of being in America right now, even if you're not living in New York City, is the whole world's pouring into the United States. But we're exposed to folks from China and India, all over the world. And so it helps you also see the narrowness of American culture over and against other cultures around the world. And it also causes you to see how deep racism is. Because, it's deep. So we're folks, I think of our small group right now, we're doing a genogram with someone from China. Well, the racism of China, which we don't have time to go into right now, you Chinese you could probably explain it better than I can. But it's deep. Middle Earth. Okay, and it's really, and you realize when you've got someone here their parents came from China, came to America, and they're carrying in their bones 5,000 years of the way they view white people, black people, Latino people, and you're trying to put them in the same church? You realize, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then you do the same thing with someone from India. You're like, even though they may have been born and raised in Queens, it doesn't matter. If they were in a school with all multiracial stuff, when you get down to it, Indians in their India, that whole caste system is in their bones. It's deep. It is so deep. So the power of this is it causes you to, you're in it, like you're in it. Like you're in it's just a mess in there. But it's good. it's not bad. It's just a mess. But you're saying, the fact that you don't talk about it, it's not going away. It's not going away. Those of you from Korea, being pure blood, and all that stuff, and I can go on and on. It's just like, so, gosh. And then you get the evangelical church, which is legacy of racism, the American church. That is the legacy of evangelicalism. From Azusa Street splitting on race. That's That's American Christianity. Born and grew on racism, slavery. I mean, just the whole history of it. So, Jones, we're product of that. And so here we are trying to live out Scripture, but we have to understand there's a gravitational pull to whether it's the American dream, take care of yourself, this is too much, forget about it, and I shouldn't have said it that way, huh, Joe? Forget about it. I slipped out. But we have to be able to name the demonic powers to break them, okay? What is your name? We are Legion, okay? And I'm telling you, when we get into this, we get into reconciliation, we are getting into legions of demons. All right? No, that is a genogram. So I'm reading a book right now, King Leopold's Ghost. And I've had to stop and pick it up my third time. King Leopold was the king of Belgium, late 1800s. And it's his colonization of what was called the Congo at that time. And I remember, and at that time, Europe was dividing up the world into colonies. And it's horrific. The book is so painful to read that I can't read it before I go to bed anymore. All right, I gotta read earlier in the day, so I got to put it down and pick it up. But it's such an expose on how Europe, raped Africa, and how everyone participated in this. And so I remember when the Rwandan genocide happened, everyone kept saying to me, if you want to understand the Hutu and the Tutsis, you got to understand what the Belgians did. And I just remember never having the time to go into it, to actually study it. Now I'm like, oh my God. So even a genocide in the early 90s is going back 100 years earlier. And that's why if we're involved in this kind of work, we're always reading and learning history. Because history is so important to understand people and where they're coming from. And wow, it's been a great read for me. And even reading the history of India and novels about India and China, but that perspective is so important. And part of what you're committing to by being involved in this kind of work is you're going to be a learner. And you're listening to stories of people, absolute incarnation. Tell me your story about your family. But I'm also reading and I'm watching movies that are really important to understand, because it's just a vast, complex, wonderful topic. But if you go into it, your temptation is to get in despair. Because you say, this is so awful. I mean, slavery in America, just, oh my gosh. And you can say, we'll never come out. You go in a pit and feel like, I will never get out of this thing. But really, here's the great news. The great news is that we are the church. That Jesus has risen from the dead and he has birthed the church of the living God. And the blood of the cross has destroyed the dividing wall of hostility. Christ did something that we could never do on our own. And he is risen from the dead and he's alive. And he has created a new family. It's called the people of God. And it transcends all races, all cultures, all countries. It's genders. It's unbelievable. That is our core theology. So it's the ability to hold attention. I have to look at this pain. I mean, Latin America, you study the history of Latin America, and then you hear about them wanting to put up a wall, and you're like, oh, you know nothing about history, and the whole economic policies, what we've done in Latin America, and just sucking the continent up for its resources, and that they've got to come here now. But it's complicated. I'm not an economist. I'm not a politician. All I know is it's really heavy. It's what Spain did, what Portugal did. I mean, it's just what the United States has done. It's terrific. But I got to look at it. I got to study. I got to be honest about it. But I don't come with a despair. I come with a great excitement. Because what? Because Jesus really has done something marvelous. And I believe he's alive. And I actually believe that he's powerful enough to actually cause what he died for to happen. And so our core theology is that we're the new family of Jesus. We believe in miracles. And so now we've got a new language for a new culture. And so we have developed skills. And so now we've got to teach people, how do I live in this new family of Jesus? That's the great task of leadership in any multiracial church. Because we're all leaving our families, our cultures, and our countries. And we're learning, how do I love? How do I do this new family of Jesus thing? So over the last 20 years, we've developed what we call skills. And so it's some skills, things like clean fighting and stop mind reading. We have a new language at New Life Fellowship. We have a language that we use, but there's intentional follow-up. We actually call people into account when they mess up. It's a training opportunity, and it produces a transformed community. I can't tell you how important this is. Without this, we would not be where we are today. But it takes time to build this into a community. Because you understand, it's a new language for everybody. It's uncomfortable for everybody. And so, we're teaching people how to bond in the new family of Jesus. People don't know, how do I connect? How do I love? I know, but we're going to teach you how to love well. And not just people who look like you, but all people across race, culture, gender, etc. And so here's our 10 skills. We call it the Emotionally Healthy Relationship course. And there's 10. So I'll just, we don't tolerate dirty fighting. We do clean fighting here at New Life, So people say, oh, it's my culture. I said, yeah, you know what? We've been around long enough. Mama, it's a lie. I don't care how you cut it. It's a lie. And so what's culture? What's biblical? And I think over the years, we've been able to sort that out. And it's been very helpful. Not that we have it all sorted out, but quite well. But we say, we live by these eight skills. And we enforce them as a new community, and we're helping people live into it. And there's a skill curriculum. I encourage you to pick it up. You'll be more on our website on that, but we're actually launching it out for churches around the country called Emotionally Healthy Relations. But it's for us, reconciliation and skills go hand in hand. Of course, the place of brokenness and vulnerability. Without it, forget it. Can't sit at the table. And then this whole theology of grief and loss. Part of EHS, and a core part of EHS is grief, and understanding a theology of grief. I often will get, African Americans upset with me. Why doesn't this white person understand what it's like to be black, and what it's like to be followed in stores and pulled over by the police, and he doesn't feel my pain, or she doesn't feel my pain. And I'd be like, listen, he doesn't feel anything. He doesn't feel with his wife. So he's so shut down emotionally. How can he enter your pain? He doesn't even know his own pain, because his discipleship and his interior life is so superficial. So you're asking him to bridge a barrier. He doesn't even know himself. How can he know you? And so grief is the degree to which you know your losses, is the degree to which you become a compassionate person. But we get into reconciliation, we're talking about a lot of grief and loss. 2/3 of the Psalms are laments. We have a whole book called Lamentations. We have a whole book of Job, 35 chapters of grief. But we don't do grieving, and we're trying to do this kind of work, which is all about pain, and letting that pain become part of us and form something that's a resurrection life. This becomes a critical piece of discipleship in any kind of community, trying to do reconciliation. And then, which has been mentioned already, which is the whole thing of incarnational listening. It's one of the skills we teach, but teaching people to be present. Sacred space. I don't know if you've ever seen this by Martin Buber, the Hasidic scholar, that when you teach someone to be an I-thou relationship, I'm going to be present with you, God comes, versus an I-it relationship. So a key discipleship issue in any community, but especially one doing bridging barriers, is we've got to teach people to be present with each other. But do you understand, if you were in a family that nobody was ever listened to you, so you never learned how to listen to anybody, and so here you are, you're trying to do reconciliation in a community, and now you're dealing with all the complexity of this? But do you understand that you don't even listen to the person who is in the same culture as you, the same age as you, and your next door neighbor, and you don't even know how to connect with them? So this becomes such a core issue, the ability to actually be present with someone who's different than you. But we're all different. We like to say every marriage, even when two people marry the same culture, it's still a cross-cultural marriage, because every person's so different, And again, I think the specific contribution of EHS is, is found in that book. I didn't mention one more. I'll just throw this out to you. It's called, Understanding Power and Wise Boundaries. Power was mentioned, but understanding power is, both Kathy and Gabriel mentioned that. I'm sure that, oh my gosh, what's your name? Ephraim's going to mention it in a few minutes. Sorry, Ephraim, sorry. Yeah. But we all have power, and there's a really nice section, there's a chapter on power, and I never understood power, really. The intricacies of power and how it's exercised. Very, critical theme, and I commend there's a chapter in that for it. They did a lot of studies on Holocaust victims of multi-generational transmission of trauma. That if folks in the Holocaust came out of the Holocaust and survived, but they didn't deal with their trauma, they simply passed it on to their kids. And then their kids, because they didn't deal with it, they passed it on to their kids. And so this Harvard prof did a whole big thing on this. You have multi-generational systemic transmission of trauma. We've got a lot of that going on right now. All right? So the question is, who's going to break it? And if we don't become aware of it and break it, we simply pass it on. And that's what's happening here. So the question is, can we step in and break it for our children and our children's children? And we actually form communities that are very self-aware, very conscious, and actually begin to, form these radical new communities. So let me just, this is one way to think about reconciliation, and I love this chart. And it applies to learning anything. It comes from educational theory. And think with me for a second here. You become aware of an issue, you ponder reconciliation, you value it. There should be no racism in the church, but at some point, they say you got to jump over this action behavioral gap, and you reprioritize your whole life around reconciliation. And then you own it. It's just in you. You breathe it. I think we're talking here about going to a next level of understanding it, where my whole life is built on it, and I go somewhere. So with that, This is traditional discipleship. You know what we're introducing you to here? And I'll close with this little diagram here. Most churches, we meet Jesus, attend church, connect, serve, grow, and make a little impact in the world. We're talking about meet Jesus, attend church, and be deeply transformed. And that's the kind of impact you make in the world. That's what we're looking at. And out of that comes all of what we call today emotionally healthy spirituality. So let me pray, and I'll close, and I'll invite Rich to come. So, Father, thank you so much that we're in this room today, and the miracle that we're here. And I pray, Lord, that you'd move all of us in this room, Father, our next number up in that journey, that we might become men and women who truly bridge race, culture, class, and gender. And, Lord, that the miracle of the beauty of us being together might be a prophetic witness to the culture and the powers and the principalities of the air. Your name, Lord Jesus, might go forth. We pray this in your name. Amen. Thank you, everybody.